Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the Engage podcast, or should I say, welcome back to the Engage podcast, because I think we should acknowledge we've not been at this for a while, have we, Peter?
And no, we have both been away, haven't we?
Where have you been?
I was down in Cornwall for a week and a half.
Very nice, and was it a pleasant time?
It was a lovely time.
How were the animals?
Many of them.
Yes.
No, it was very nice to be there. How was your time away?
Very good, thank you. I was up at a wonderful church in Leamington Spa called Mighton Church, where I was speaking twice at 9:15, 11:15 on the very weighty and urgent and necessary topic of what the Bible says about the beginning of life. Mm-hmm. And you can find that on our website, our YouTube channel, Care.org UK. And then I travelled down to north of Bristol, where my mum lives, and then we travelled down to Lyme Regis.
Very nice.
Oh, it was fantastic. And I swam in the sea.
Very good. Lots of Jane Austen connections in Lyme Regis.
Yeah, we passed a couple of things that had sort of her kicking about and all that jazz. And there's famously the, what do they call that thing that they walk on? Oh, we didn't, I went up, but it was very windy. So I didn't stay up. But a seagull tried to take I had like an apple pie bar from the holiday cottage. It was in a little gift bag. And I took it to the beach, and a seagull actually came and tried to take it from my hand. I mean, anyway, that seagull is no more.
I was going to say who won, but
I won.
You've answered that question for us.
One blow, and that was it. Let's move on quickly, because this is descending into the realm of farce. We were chatting earlier, weren't we? And we're sort of saying, okay, a few weeks off, what do we want to talk about? And I think there's a couple of things we want to hit. There was a really interesting speech in the House of Commons to a grand total of about 3 others. Yeah. Which, by the way, we will come on to this. I'm just going to say this now because it has annoyed me somewhat. People have made a real virtue of the fact that, no one was listening. Super important speech by Danny Krueger about the retrieval of the Christian heritage of our nation. And actually, the type of debate and speech that he gave, according to parliamentary procedure, always happens at the very end of a parliamentary day, and this happened to be at the end of the parliamentary week, and it's very normal that there's hardly anyone in the chamber, because the mechanism is simply one MP stands up and says something and the government responds, end of. Yeah. And so actually the fact he did it to a near empty chamber is not anywhere near as unusual as some people are making out. So can we just all calm down a little bit on that point?
I think that's absolutely fair.
Thank you very much.
But we'll come on to that.
Yes.
But we were actually going to start, I think, with something which has been in the news quite a fair bit over the last few days, particularly as people are starting to respond to what is being introduced.
Yes.
So we're going to start with the Online Safety Act, aren't we?
We most certainly are. Okay, let's first of all celebrate the fact that as of Friday of last week, so 25th of July, a key part of the Online Safety Act is now legally enforced across our nation, and that is robust and effective age verification on all UK online porn. And for those of you who've watched this podcast and are loyal, avid fans of CARE, those who have tracked with us for some time, you will know this has been a campaign priority for CARE, and we have now succeeded. Yeah. So get the bunting out, get the street parties to celebrate, get all the parents together, because we can all go around and show our faces to the children and say, no more stumbling across porn accidentally, no more coming across it as young as 7 or 8 years old. We'll hopefully see the average age at which people first see porn, which is 13, by the way, change as a result of this. So I just think it's a huge cause of celebration.
Well, no, I think it absolutely is. And it's something which we had been... Well, it's been a long time in the making, hasn't it?
I mean, it's been a decade really of work, hasn't it?
Exactly. And so it does sort of show how when you are campaigning on legislation, it is not a quick process. No, and there were plenty of low points on that journey as well. Yes. But it is great to have got that finally over the line.
And it is interesting what's happened afterwards, and this was all really started because the Reform leader Nigel Farage and his party were basically saying that the Online Safety Act actually, far from protecting children, endangers children. And what I think is helpful to understand here is this was triggered because there was a massive spike in the number of people who were downloading virtual private network apps or VPNs. And this basically, it's pretty simple. It allows you to disguise where you're accessing the internet from. So it's as if you're accessing the internet from another country that may not be subject to the same laws, in this case, the Online Safety Act, as this country. And in one sense, I mean, this is not a big surprise. And as the government minister, Peter Kyle, rightly pointed out, it was probably the only right thing he really said, is that actually there's been a massive increase in the number of people. 6.2 million users have downloaded, I think it's called Yachty, which is an age verification app. And so actually the number of people who are downloading the correct app in order to, you presume, prove their age and continue sadly accessing pornographic content is vastly more than the number of people who have been downloading VPNs to try to get around the system. So again, I think what it shows is that there are always going to be critics of something that's so novel in this country and something that's so new. But that's what triggered Farage and his kind of cronies coming out and saying, well, actually, we think the act should be repealed. And Peter, from my perspective, two things. One is, I don't want to dismiss questions about the implementation of the Online Safety Act, because I'm not sitting here saying that it's the perfect act. But at the same time, what is Mr. Farage's idea for how they're going to protect our young people from accessing particularly violent, misogynistic, brutal, degrading pornography? And I know for a fact, because he admitted it, they don't have an alternative plan.
Yeah, no, completely. Why don't we set the scene a little bit and just kind of reinforce why this act is so important?
Let's do it.
So you've already mentioned that the average age at which children first see pornography is 13. Other statistics around use of pornography amongst young people. So by age 9, 10% have seen it. By age 11, 27% have seen it. And particularly on social media platforms, young people are likely to stumble across pornography. So 41% of young people are estimated to have seen it on X, formerly known as Twitter, 33% on Instagram, 32% on Snapchat.
And that's a really important point here, is that when we first campaigned for age verification in the Digital Economy Act of 2016, it only applied to commercial pornographic websites, which are things like Pornhub, for example. It did not cover social media platforms. And that is therefore a good outcome of the government U-turning on implementing what was called Part 3 of the Digital Economy Act, age verification, and saying we're going to bring something more comprehensive. And they did that through the Online Safety Bill, now the Online Safety Act, which covered not just commercial sites, but crucially, as per your statistics, social media sites as well. So we're actually in a better place now than we would have been under the Digital Economy Act.
Yeah, which is really, really encouraging. A couple just about the content of pornography, because I think this is where it starts to become really dystopian.
Yeah.
So 79% of under 18s are estimated to have seen violent pornography. So that's depicting degrading or painful sex acts. In a survey, 72% of young people agreed with a statement that viewing online pornography affects young people's expectations around sex and relationships.
Yeah.
And just 4% disagreed.
Yeah.
47% of young people state that they think girls expect sex to involve violent behaviour such as slapping and choking, and 42% even suggested that girls enjoy such behaviour.
Yeah.
So we have been living in a mass social experiment which is going horribly wrong.
Yes, and this is a really important link, and I think particularly in a context where much of the news headlines has been around, will age verification work, and how will it work? And what about concerns around privacy? And if I have to give my details and prove my age, will that just expose my data to privacy hackers and data hackers and data harvesters, for example? And I'm not trying to dismiss those concerns, but what I haven't heard a lot of is, wait a minute, why are we doing this again?
Yeah.
And you've just outlined why we're doing it. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's a real shame that our national media, for example, has failed to focus on the context within which we're introducing age verification, and has chosen instead to get caught up in a really unhelpful exchange of barbs between Nigel Farage and Peter Kyle, the I think it's the science minister or minister for technology. Anyway, he's a minister, where he compared Farage to, and said he was on the side of extreme pornographers, which is, I think, a complete overreaction. And didn't help the situation, and took focus away from vulnerable children and instead made it about personalities. We talked earlier, didn't we, about it's a sad reflection just on the state of our politics today.
Yeah, well, it absolutely is. I sometimes feel like we are forever banging the drum around the combination of truth and grace.
Yes.
But this is just an absolute case in point of the lack of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in that, I don't think anyone ever could be saying, could be wanting to compare Farage to Jimmy Savile, as Peter Kyle did.
And that was approved by Number 10.
Yeah.
As we now know, was revealed in the Telegraph. Number 10 actually signed off that comparison.
But in some ways, it is one in a long line of really pretty dodgy bits of messaging which have gone out in order to sort of win a political game.
Yes.
Do you remember back when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister?
Yes.
I'm sure Labour put out... Labour definitely put out like a post on social media saying like, do you believe... It was something like, do you believe that like rapists should be allowed on the street? Rishi Sunak does, or something.
Yes, I remember that.
Like, clearly that's not true.
Yes.
And to make clear this is not all going one way, the Conservatives and to some extent Reform have tried to kind of pin down Keir Starmer around Jimmy Savile too, from his own role in the CPS.
Yes.
So the phrase "politics is mucky business."
Yes.
I think there needs to be a serious clean-up about the way we start talking about opponents, because winning a political battle shouldn't look like this.
I agree. And actually, again, I think it's really helpful to say that there is a completely fair and legitimate conversation that we need to have, which is how do we balance freedom of expression and avoiding censorship online with protecting children from content that is, as you cited earlier, violent, misogynistic, degrading, and is clearly influencing young people's behavior. Yeah. I mean, we know now since 2021, there's been a 40% increase in the number of violent sexual crimes. And the National Police Chiefs Council safeguarding lead has actually said that is linked to pornographic use. And so we know the connections. And this is about joining the dots. But I can totally sympathize with the tension as someone who believes in free speech and believes in protecting children online.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of the issue here is we've fallen into a position where when it comes to free speech, some people just seem to be for completely free speech, free speech, as it were, and no limits whatsoever.
Yeah.
And my question about that particular position is, but are you honestly saying that you want to live in a society where there are no penalties whatsoever for completely inappropriate speech and language that actively incites people to violence and causes genuine harm to others?
Yeah.
And so therefore we should expect there to be some limits in a civilized society on our free speech. And I think when it comes to pornography, I think it should be entirely uncontroversial to say, yeah, do you know what? I don't think kids should be watching porn. I think that we can't just leave it up to parents to make sure they're not watching porn in this age of the internet, like the Wild West, no effective regulation. I actually think this is an example where the state does have a duty to step in, and that will create this tension with censorship and free speech, especially if social media companies are heavy-handed in how they choose to respond to the new requirements on them. But the point is that there's still room for some refinement. If mistakes are made in the early months of enforcing age verification, there's still time for them to be corrected.
Yeah.
And the reason that we have appointed Ofcom to be the regulator and the enforcer is it's their job to adjudicate. And now that creates both a challenge, but also let's give them a chance to prove that they're up to the job.
Yeah. Well, I think we're now sort of starting to take it in a really interesting direction, aren't we, in terms of the tension which is at play here. But it's probably just worth explaining because some people won't necessarily be aware of this. The Online Safety Act doesn't just cover pornography, does it? So it's
much bigger than that.
Exactly. It covers a range of harmful behaviours. So that includes material around, say, eating disorders or
suicide,
around self-harm.
Yeah.
And there have been some really tragic cases.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the most famous one was the one of Molly Russell, wasn't it? Of children and teenagers who have ended up self-harming or taking their own lives, having seen that content online. Now, at CARE, we have predominant. Our focus on this has predominantly been from a pornography point of view.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean at all that we don't care about those other issues, because we do. But obviously we have our finite resources, which we have to concentrate in certain areas. Once you're starting to get onto some of these other areas and a broader question over what is harmful, then you're starting to get into questions around free speech. So yes, we might all again be pretty clear-cut that material around self-harm is quite obviously harmful.
Yeah.
But I saw something from, I think it was a Conservative MP the other day, and this is an extreme example of where we clearly haven't quite found the right line yet, where I think it was on X, and her speech in the House of Commons criticising the government for their response to the grooming gangs scandal.
Yes.
Was requiring someone to have their age verified in order to watch it. And so her comment was, well, clearly the government is more worried about protecting someone from seeing my speech than protecting them from the grooming gang, which is not very fair. But you can see why there are concerns when there's a situation like that.
Absolutely. And again, I come back to the fact that there will need to be some refinement, and mistakes will inevitably be made, because this is new for us all.
Indeed.
And again, don't we just need to come back to, you called it a great social experiment of largely unhindered access to pornography, where children were coming across it even without seeking it out.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bigger tension here, a bigger societal issue, which is we live in a society that wants to say there are no rules anymore when it comes to sex and sexuality. The ancient Victorian constraints and sexual morals are now done away with, and I think it was Roy Jenkins in the 1960s who said a civilized society is a permissive society. And look, I don't think all the reforms that came out of the 1960s were a bad thing at all. But I think in the whole area of sex and sexuality, I think that the church's messaging has got better. I think the language of sex being a gift, gracious gift from a good God, has got sharper, although there's still work to do. The church is not squeaky clean when it comes to the issue of pornography, and we should be honest about that. But at the same time, I think by lifting and removing more and more restraints, you've created a massive industry, the porn industry, that now is exploiting often so many people. Even just a couple of months ago, New York Times did an expose of Pornhub, one of the biggest porn websites in the world, revealing internal documents that showed they knowingly published video content with children that they knew were being abused. And you have to say, actually, society, we bear some of the responsibility for this, don't we? We have taken a good thing from God and we have perverted it to such a degree that there was recently the dreadful story, this terrifying story of Bonnie Blue is her name. And she's claimed to have slept with more than 1,000 men in a 12-hour period, which is a record, by the way, but a sickening record. And I mean, can you get any sharper or clearer example of how perverted society has become? And so this is a long overdue fight back to say, and I worry the genie's out the bottle for the current generation.
Oh, I think absolutely.
It's future generations that we're now investing in by saying, we don't think you should be exposed in the same way that our generation was exposed. And how politicians, serious politicians who aspire to be the prime minister of this country, can come out and almost in a blasé way, and it's pure populism, say, this act should be repealed, without coming up with an alternative. Well, what is your solution, Mr. Farage, to the fact that children as young as 7 or 8 are coming across porn online? What are you going to do to protect them from it? And as far as I can see, he doesn't have an answer.
Well, I think this would be my biggest question about the reform movement as a whole, is it feels like almost everything they do is sheer populism.
Yes.
And so they know what positions will land well with the majority of people in the country. They know that currently they don't have to actually deliver a plan on any of them, and they can come out with a whole load of big statements and big promises and criticize everything which everyone else is doing. And that approach is currently proving quite successful for them. But one day, if they do get into power, they will actually have to work out what they're going to do with
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we've talked a bit now about sort of some of the tensions between protecting children and protecting freedom of speech. I think we're probably both kind of quite strongly down one side of that argument.
I think so. I mean, both are biblical ideas, I think. And I want to be careful here because I think that you see a much clearer emphasis in the Bible on protecting the vulnerable than you do any explicit passage that says, oh, and by the way, make sure that you have a constitutional right to free speech.
Oh gosh, yeah, I remember one time having to when it was our Friday long read, and the big story was around freedom of speech. Yeah. I'm thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? And like trying to kind of
Googling Bible verses on free speech.
Well, yeah, to some extent. I do think that there are good biblical principles for why speech is a good thing.
Yes,
but also, as you have already alluded to, I think very few people would be utter free speech absolutists.
No, and on the point about protecting children, we know from the Bible that God has a heart for the vulnerable. We are commanded to be a voice for the voiceless. Proverbs 31:8-9, but also just in the Gospels, in Matthew 19, in the famous passage, then the people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them, but the disciples rebuked them, and Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he placed his hands on them, he went on from there, and we miss how radical what Jesus was doing is. You know, what he was doing there was he was welcoming and accepting and blessing those in that society who were considered to be the least important. Yeah. And it was kind of counter-cultural, it was revolutionary. And I think that it was setting up the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven that has burst into this world in Jesus, is a place where actually we want to welcome little children, we want to involve them, we want to listen to them, we want to respect them. And the law in regards to this in our country today has improved immeasurably since previous generations. But this is a new frontier. Yeah. That's the point, isn't it? This is a new challenge. Well, not particularly new, but it's a challenge that has been not dealt with, and this is the first step towards beginning to address it.
Completely, and actually following on from what you just said there, Jesus has some very striking words which he says about people who damage children.
Yes.
Where he sort of talks about it would be better for them to have a millstone around their neck.
And it's right here. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea.
Exactly.
Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. I mean, that is pure Old Testament prophet language. The announcement of woe, of you're going to be summoned for judgment for what you have done, it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So there's a very clear biblical mandate on that. And I also think, and politically this is an interesting conversation point, it really demonstrates the difference between, say, being a classical liberal or being a libertarian.
Yes.
So a libertarian effectively cares about the freedom to do what they like,
anything,
regardless of what the consequences are.
Yes.
Whereas a liberal believes in freedom, but as long as it doesn't harm someone else.
Yes.
And what we have in a situation here is some of the libertarians are coming out and saying, well, I don't want to be stopped from doing what I want to do. It's like, well, it's not just about you, is it?
No.
Because it's harming incredibly vulnerable people.
And I do wonder where this will go next, because I think, once you start taking steps to protect children from online porn, then it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if people start to investigate more closely some of the goings on within the porn industry. And the more stories that come out in the press about the exploitation, the abuse, and so on, I think the more stories of people like Bonnie Blue and just the tragedy that's involved in that. And I think then you might begin to hear more calls here, similar to what you hear in the United States, where there's a bigger movement to basically ban pornography and stop it completely. And I sometimes think that in this country, there's been a fear from Christians around being too vocal on this kind of thing. Oh, we don't want to be kind of called the moralists, and we don't want to be called the kind of, pious, holy huddle weirdos who don't like sex and all that jazz. Whereas, if you think about the changes in society when it comes to the transgender issue and how the child protection angle was the kind of thing that everyone got on board with and said, this is too far. maybe we'll see something similar happen when it comes to the exploitation within the porn industry.
Well, I do think you are starting to see an increasing backlash against it. So
Yes.
I've certainly read more, even in the last 6 months.
Yes. Negative.
About the damage of the pornography industry, particularly actually which is inflicted upon, say, the men who watch it. And obviously women also watch it, but those are the articles I've been reading. And about how it damages, say, intimacy with a spouse or a partner, and how it damages kind of your sexual drive. So I think you are starting to see a bit of it. And stories like the one you alluded to with Bonnie Blue, or the other example is Lily Phillips, the other person who's competing.
Yes, it was 900, I think she.
The general attitude to those stories is disgust.
Yeah.
So
and maybe amongst Generation Z, Gen Z, a question of how did this ever become a thing? Like how do we end up where this was even allowed?
Yeah.
That no one was kind of saying to Bonnie, yeah, I mean, from the story that I read, her mum and stepdad were supportive of her starting to become a cam girl on OnlyFans. And her partner, they married and then they separated. He apparently encouraged her to do this. And this is what happens when you... Well, we've talked about this so many times on the podcast. If a society chooses to reject God and reject his revelation, then God gives them over.
Yeah.
And one of the signs of that is sexual depravity. And that's what the porn industry ultimately is. It's one of the most obvious ways that we have perverted what God has given us.
Well, completely. If you were to take it all the way back to Eden, where Adam and Eve eat the fruit and essentially make themselves like God.
Yes.
They decide that they want to create the rules for themselves as opposed to living by God's rule. That is what our society has done around sex. We've decided we want to abandon what God, the good pattern and design which God has laid out for it.
Yes.
And instead do things our own way. And so, as you say, God has given us over. And once you start making your own personal freedom your God, ironically, it starts to enslave you, because that is what we have seen here as people start to get addicted to pornography.
Yes,
for
that's
instance.
right. And it's the twin idols, isn't it, of sex and individual autonomy. Yeah. And pornography sort of combines them in a toxic combination. And it's frightening because of the impact it has, the negative impact it has in so many ways on so many people. And it's always worth saying that certainly within the church as well, I think we recognize, I think, a bit more now that people struggle with this within the church, and it doesn't disqualify you from being a Christian if your besetting sin is pornography. And this is the power of and the grace of Christ. And actually, we were mentioning earlier today, there's a lovely book by Thomas Chalmers, I've forgotten the title now, which is really annoying because it's kind of crucial. But it's the expulsive power of a new affection.
Yeah, that was it.
And it's this idea that actually the more affection for Christ fills you, the more that drives out disordered affections, and the more then legitimate affections, that fall within God's will fall into the right order underneath that overarching affection for Christ. The more Christ-like we will be in our affection, I suppose, another way of putting it. And I think, that plus the message of forgiveness, and it's sad, isn't it? Because there are stories of people whose sex life within the legitimate context has still been massively ruined because of porn addiction before perhaps they became a Christian, or even after. And so we need to constantly be helping people and also constantly reminding them about the grace that is available in Christ. Because otherwise, I think people could be, they just fall into despair and think that nothing can ever change. But actually, that's the power of the gospel. It can change as well. So there's a lot still to do on this whole issue, both in society and in the church, I think, as well.
Yeah, well, I think probably the only other thing I would add to that, because it's something which, as the years have gone on, I have felt increasingly strongly, is I think as a church, we need to be far better at presenting a positive vision about what good sex looks like. Because I agree when you mentioned earlier, like, it's great that the church now talks about sex as a good gift from God. That's that's absolutely true. But I have heard very little in now over 30 years in the church, apart from don't have sex outside marriage and sometimes sex is a good gift from God. I've heard basically nothing beyond that.
Yes.
And the problem is that then people do sometimes just like fill that void from other places. So, I mean, I have had people who I know who have effectively come up to Sophie or I and sort of asked us around, well, do you think masturbation's wrong or do you think it's fine? Or others who have talked to us about pornography, or some who have effectively not really who are about to get married and don't really know kind of anything about what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been really, really bad at actually kind of laying out some positive teaching around sex. And I think part of it is because as a church we think, is this all just a bit icky to talk up the front about?
Yes.
And obviously there are right settings for an appropriate setting.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think that the mistake here would be to say that, therefore let's fill, well, not that you're saying this, but, let's make sure the pulpits of our land are talking in great detail about what you're saying, and a more appropriate setting, and certainly what I benefited from was in the context of marriage prep, but also in the more informal discipleship.
Yeah.
In one sense, I think it's great that people are coming up to you because you and Sophie are married, you've got more experience, and so therefore it's right that people would come and say, talk to us, help us out, let us learn from you. But I suppose ideally what you're saying is you think it might be healthier and better if you were sort of, you and Sophie were one among a number of helpful voices.
That would certainly be true.
Yes, they weren't coming sort of completely unaware, but had good education.
Yeah. And I guess perhaps the striking contrast is this. One of the children who was interviewed by the Children's Commissioner for the report which I did a couple of years ago said porn is the starting point for young people when they come to learn about sex.
Yeah.
And I guess
we should change that.
As Christians, we don't think it should be like that. Because even within, I guess as Christians, we would still believe that even within a marriage context, you could have sex which was not necessarily very edifying or healthy. We don't believe in sex which is degrading or shameful or abusive or violent, as we talked about before. And so what would it look like to present a positive vision of sex being something which is a gift in marriage, which is loving, which is based around honouring the other person and putting them first and not just about your own self-fulfillment. That could be such a radically different vision for our society from the one which they are currently getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And how's this for a segue? You mentioned there at the end a radically different vision for our society. And recently in the House of Commons, an MP gave us a radically different vision for society. Now, you're talking there about within the church.
Yeah.
He was connecting the health of the church with the health of the nation.
Completely, yeah.
And this was the other thing, if it's not too rough a segue, but I mean, I nearly always manage to make a segue, don't I, Isaac? Nearly always. And I think Danny Krueger's speech, Thursday the 17th of July, right at the end of play in the House of Commons, really about a retrieval of our Christian heritage, which included the quite striking lines that a storm is coming. And his argument was, without reclaiming Christianity and reasserting it as having a central role in the life of our nation, we will not be able to weather the storm. I thought it was... allowing for some hyperbole. I thought that was a very poetic line. So I enjoyed it for its sort of, quite striking imagery.
Well, I mean, he's a very poetic speaker, isn't he?
So what did you think of his speech? Did you enjoy his speech?
Yes, I did. I thought that it was really... You're trying to make me laugh.
No, I'm not trying to make you laugh. Maybe a little bit.
I thought it was a really good thing to have said in the House of Commons. The Christian faith is something which has shaped this nation. has, I guess, to use Glenn Scrivener's language, it kind of has really shaped the air we breathe, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And that it has done an immense good in our nation. I thought it was really good to talk about some of the alternative worldviews which have been put forward.
Yeah.
So he talks essentially about secularism at one point, where he was sort of saying, like, we've had this idea that if you take faith out of the centre and we could all just like live happily ever after and just coexist and it would all be great and it would all be really tolerant. But actually what we've done is currently we have a society which has effectively filled that void with secularism, and then we have seen the outworking of that in recent weeks with passing of assisted suicide legislation and decriminalisation of abortion. He also talks about other competing worldviews which are coming into this space. So he talked about the rise of Islam in the UK and the rise of what he called wokeism as well. And then he
whatever that means.
Well, indeed, we'll come on to that. And then he eventually called our nation essentially back to put the Christian God at the centre of who we are and what we do.
I mean, look, I enjoyed his speech. When I first saw that he'd given the speech and I hadn't actually read it, some people were sort of reading it as if it was a sort of almost like a love letter to the Church of England, which was an extraordinary summary, because actually that was my fear when I read it. Was, I'm a nonconformist.
Indeed.
I might have said that before on the podcast.
That one.
I don't think that church and state should be mixed in the way that they are in this country. So I was nervous about, this was just a kind of, the Church of England needs to rediscover its place at the heart of communities and, blah, blah, blah. Well, yes and no. And I think sometimes the blend of church and state has caused us more problems than it solved. But what I thought was really, really helpful about the speech was exactly the bit you mentioned around his analysis of the public square and how this myth of neutrality, this idea that we can have a completely neutral public square and there we are all playing along, it just doesn't work. And that is because the public square is a battleground of gods. Yeah. If you don't worship the one true God, then you will worship something or someone. And I thought that was really helpful. I think I've been... I think some of the responses, I think this often happens when Christians see God, the church, Christianity mentioned even slightly positively in the House of Commons, they sort of lose their minds and think this is the best thing since sliced bread. So that's one extreme reaction that I find a little bit frustrating. Yeah. I equally have been sad at the way that I didn't think his speech was politically partisan at all. And so I would have loved it if Christians who are consciously on the left, as it were, centre-left, even further left, could have positively engaged and said, this is a really helpful, fair speech. But instead, I think I was a little bit disheartened to see, if not explicit critiques, then certainly implicit critiques, which were more talking about, actually, we've got to be more aware that Christianity didn't begin in Britain, which is not what Danny claimed, that Christianity began elsewhere, that Christianity has also done harm in this country, not just good. And I think that is a perfectly fair point by itself. But it would have been far more gracious and I think far more accurate and better as a kind of representation of Christians in politics working together to have put party politics aside. And this, by the way, is why I get so irritated by Christians who so deliberately sign up as I'm on the left or I'm on the right, because I think that prevents us sometimes from being a good judge of a speech just because it came from a Tory politician. So I was a bit disheartened by some of the criticism I saw from Christians of the speech. But at the same time, I don't want to sort of fall into the trap of hyperbole and thinking that, this now is a sign of the changing times. And I think, well, no, because I've heard plenty of politicians say amazing things in the House of Commons to more than 3 people, it should be said. And I want to just personally find a nice balance between sort of thinking that this is a sign that somehow revival is now about to break out across the aisles and being snarky about it just because it came. That's what it felt to me like. Some were being snarky about it just because his politics is different from their politics. I thought it was a very, very sad reflection of a sort of political immaturity, which was pretty disheartening.
Yeah, and I think my reading, and I know we have read some of the same critiques, my reading was some were being overcritical. Yeah, essentially for the sake of not being positive.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Which I don't think was really very helpful or fair. I think there was far more in that speech which I considered really good.
Yes.
Than not. I think you are. I think you are right to caution against getting overly excited. But I do think that this is just another example of a broader trend, which I think we're starting to see in our nation, of people being more willing to talk about faith and specifically about Christian faith.
Yeah.
And there being more of a space for that again. And potentially a renewed openness to hearing it as well.
Yeah.
So I know we've talked in previous episodes about the rise in percentages of, say, young men going to church. I think there is an increased willingness to hear about stuff. And certainly the environment in the public square feels very different to 20 years ago. We're not in the age of the new atheists anymore.
And I think one really important sort of application from Danny's example, I think in the immediate aftermath of the votes that he cites on abortion and assisted suicide in the House of Commons, he talked on X about how the mask has now fallen away, and he's going to be more explicit and going to call it out. And actually, when he first came into politics, perhaps he did hide his faith a little bit, but now he's going to be more vocal and all of that. And Tim Farron's gone on a similar kind of Damascus kind of conversion. It's very exciting. And I think that challenge is for me, which is I want to be part of that more confident approach. I want to make sure and guard against assuming that, that's not a challenge that I face. Actually, just because I'm involved in public square work and just because I'm a Christian, I want to have the same confidence and be like, if this is a rising tide, I want to make sure I'm surfing it. I want to make sure I'm on that tide and speaking more confidently and saying, actually, do you know what? The Bible does have answers to some of the massive challenges we face as a society. It does present solutions. It does give us principles that I want to apply. And I'm even going to cite it now and again. In fact, Dan Strange wrote a very, very good article years ago, I think it was 2011. I can never pronounce it because it's a Greek word. In the Gospel Coalition Journal, Themelios. I was going to be my third guess. The Themelios. In the Gospel Coalition's Themelios, then he wrote an article saying, actually, we should as Christians use the Bible, even in the public square, because at the time there was quite a trend towards, don't quote chapter and verse, just underpinned by Christian principles. And one of the things I've reflected on since Danny's speech is actually, do you know what? I don't want to be ashamed of this book, because if I'm ashamed of this book, then perhaps that does speak to a fear in my heart, a greater fear of man than a fear of God himself. So I personally have found it quite helpful to reflect on that.
Well, I think the other counterpart to that too, if we are too afraid of using the Bible or being explicit about where we are getting our beliefs from. We read, don't we, that God's word never returns to him empty. Yes. God can accomplish through his word more powerful things than I could accomplish in my own strength. And that's not me saying that you must always kind of bring your Bible into the House of Commons. But it is sort of, I think there is an attitude thing where if we genuinely believe that God is powerful and God is sovereign and God is good, and therefore that what is laid out in his word is all of those things as well. It is good news for our nation.
Yes.
Well, then why would I
absolutely
be sort of hiding that away?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, coming back to Danny's speech, I think that it's so encouraging to reflect on the good that Christianity has done, and how actually we have seen that good play itself out in the different political parties. There have been figures on the left and figures on the right that God has used because they all love Jesus, and they have the confidence that Danny exhibited to argue for reform based on Christian principles, and prison reform, education reform, healthcare reform, and the abolition of the slave trade. Modern day Christians have played their part in advocating for modern slavery laws, against commercial sexual exploitation, and now for age verification.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so I hope this kind of galvanizes, I guess, more Christians to recognize that actually I do have a voice. I have access to wisdom from God, and I want to figure out how I can apply this better in the public square. And hey, look, an organization like CARE, that's what we're all about. So we are here to help.
Very good.
Very good. Now you should, as we close, you should definitely plug your job that you're recruiting for.
Yeah, that would be great to do. Yes, we are very excitingly recruiting for the role of content writer. And so that would be to join the comms team,
communications team,
which I think is a very exciting place to be personally.
It's all right. I'm just kidding. It's brilliant.
And there would be a particular emphasis on developing resources for Christians to help them understand what's going on in the public square and inspire them to take action. So really exciting role.
Let me sketch the background as well for this. So a few years ago, we re-galvanized our church engagement work at CARE, but we also brought comms and engagement together as a communications and engagement team because we looked at our resource cupboard. We discovered that the resource cupboard was largely bare. And we wanted to change that because, of course, the resources, getting them out to Christians, that is such a natural affinity and link with our church engagement work. So rather than having two separate teams kind of working in parallel, but potentially sometimes even at odds with each other, we've brought them together in the most fantastic blend. And so it really is a great time to join CARE. It's an exciting role. Comms team is doing loads of fantastic work. And so I encourage anyone watching this, time is of the essence because Peter set a very strict deadline. We're getting applications in already. I'd encourage you, go to the website, care.org.uk, go to the Join Us section where you can access the full job description and personal specification, application form, equal opportunities form, and get them into us ASAP. And hopefully, maybe, who knows, you could be taking your first step towards a brighter tomorrow.
Well, there we go. What an excellent plug.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great to chat.
Yeah, great to be with you. We should explain that we are hoping to be back with another episode of Engage within the next couple of weeks. That's the plan, isn't it?
Probably
in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, probably just over 2 weeks' time.
Yeah. So we've had our holiday now. Isaac, our digital media producer, the producer of the Engage podcast, is also having some holiday. Yeah. Quite rightly so.
Indeed.
And so Isaac, when you're back, have a great time. By the way, enjoy. We're going to carry on working. You enjoy, and when you come back, we'll do another Engage episode. So Peter, until then, here's to England winning the final Test match at the Oval in the cricket.
Absolutely.
Mourning the absence of Ben Stokes from the final Test. Have you seen that?
I did see that.
Yes, but never mind. We're gonna win anyway, and that'll be fun and exciting. And I'll see you on the podcast in a few weeks.
Very good.
Goodbye.
Take care.